In the beginning, before towers rose or kingdoms fell, there was only the music. The Ainur sang, and through their harmony, the shape of the world was made. From that first weaving came all rivers and mountains, every shadow and every flame, a vast tapestry that seemed both ordered and free. Yet even within that original beauty, a note of dissonance was introduced, for not all voices desired harmony. Melkor sought to bend the music to his will, to impose his pattern upon the patterns of others. Among those drawn into his orbit was one who would later be known as Sauron, a Maya of extraordinary skill, who loved the precision of order more than the freedom of song. The creation of the world was not a simple unfolding, but a contest of wills, a struggle between shaping and surrender. Where the Valar descended into the world to cultivate and guard its lands, they also claimed dominions, Manwë the airs, Ulmo the waters, Yavanna the green things that grow, and as each claimed, so the world became divided into realms, watched over and tended like vast estates. For Sauron, this revealed a principle he could not resist. To control a part of the world was to give it definition, to render it legible. To him, dominion was not corruption, but perfection, the natural culmination of creation's order. Yet beyond this great drama of division and dominion, there was a silence, a presence too subtle to be claimed. It did not enter the music with grandeur, nor descend with the Valar as lords, nor rise in rebellion with Melkor. It simply was. In the deep roots of Arda, long before the tongues of elves were shaped or the speech of men was heard, there moved a figure untouched by contest. Neither crown nor chain bound him, and his laughter was older than any throne. Though the Valar sought realms, and Sauron would one day seek empire, there remained something beneath all possession, a ground that could not be owned. This is the paradox that shapes our journey. The cosmos of Middle-earth is often told as a story of power, its discovery, its loss, its terrible costs. Yet what becomes of power when it encounters a being who does not recognize its terms? Before we can approach Tom Bombadil, before we can name him as eldest, we must linger in this tension. The world was built through music that balanced unity and difference, but Sauron inherited only the desire to bind. He learned that to command was to create anew, and he feared that without control, there would only be chaos. What then could it mean that someone, ancient and content, lived beyond control, yet not in chaos? In this first glance, we see already the outline of a conflict stranger than war. Against Sauron's rings, against his armies, against his black towers, there would stand a quiet song in a hidden valley, immune not because it was strong, but because it was free. And so the story unfolds, from the grandeur of the music to the stillness of the forest, from the claims of gods to the silence of one who claims nothing. Before we can understand why the Dark Lord trembled at that silence, we must sink deeper into the roots beneath the roots, where the foundations of Arda whisper of beings who predate even the language of fear. Beneath the great symphony of the Ainur, beneath the struggles of Valar, and the looming shadow of Melkor's ambition, the earth itself held a memory older than thrones. Rivers wound through hollows long before they were named, stones slumbered in silence, and forests stretched their roots deep into darkness that no crown could pierce. In that quiet foundation dwelt something older still, not born of dominion, but of being. Where the Valar measured and tended their realms, and where Sauron would one day calculate every fortress and army, there was another presence that did not calculate, did not divide, did not lay claim. This was the rhythm of Arda before ownership, the heartbeat of a world simply existing. It is here that Tom Bombadil begins to emerge, not as a conqueror or guardian in the manner of the Valar, nor as a rival bent on destruction, but as one who belongs to the land without ever holding it. He is called eldest, and though the word suggests age, it implies something deeper. Priority, the being who was already there before others settled. Where the Valar could be described as custodians of particular domains, Tom is the witness of the whole, yet uninterested in mastery. His house sits not upon a throne, but among trees and rivers, as though creation itself recognized a presence it could not exclude. This indifference to power is more profound than resistance. To resist is to acknowledge the contest, but to be indifferent is to show that the contest itself is irrelevant. And so, Tom's laughter is unsettling, not because it is loud, but because it reveals a freedom that no dominion can bind. Even the greatest weapon of Sauron, the ring that fastened will upon will, slipped from Tom's fingers, as if it were no more than a trinket. The ground under his feet could not be claimed, for he was not its ruler. He was its expression. The forests that whispered around his home, the old willow that bent with strange malice, the flowing waters of Withywindle, all of these seemed drawn into his song, not subdued, but companioned. Where others saw land as possession, he saw life as presence. This was what made him incomprehensible to those who thrived on dominion. He lived in a reality where possession had no meaning, and in that reality, even the works of the mightiest dark powers could crumble to dust without ever touching him. Yet this condition was not without cost. To stand outside the systems of power was also to stand outside the legacy they forged. Tom would endure, but he would not shape the destiny of elves or men. His freedom meant detachment, and his detachment meant irrelevance to those who sought history. Still, it was precisely this irrelevance that Sauron feared, for it meant that no conquest, however complete, could ever reach him. As the ages moved forward, and Sauron grew from Maya of order into Lord of domination, the quiet of Bombadil's world remained unchanged. The deeper question began to take form. How could a being so still, so content, unmake the very foundation of Sauron's designs simply by existing? To answer this, we must now turn our gaze from the one who is free of power to the one who became enslaved by it, and watch how the Maya who loved order transformed into the shadow whose fear was born of control. If Bombadil embodied a world before ownership, then Sauron was the very opposite. He was the spirit of order turned to domination, the mind that sought to reduce mystery into measure. In the earlier stages he was not yet the Dark Lord feared across Middle-earth, but Mairon the Admirable, a Maya of Ola, master of craft, structure, and precision. He loved things that were made strong through design, beautiful because they fit into patterns. In this devotion he was never frivolous, never careless, but always calculating, always refining. To him, the world was raw material, waiting to be given perfect form. Yet the perfection he sought had no patience for freedom disrupted order, and disorder was to him a kind of flaw. This flaw, in time, became intolerable. It was Melkor who whispered to him that order could not be protected without power, that structure could not be preserved without mastery over all things that might disrupt it. And so Mairon bent, not in recklessness, but in what he believed was necessity. Where Bombadil saw a tree as it was, alive and unclaimed, Mairon saw something that must be tended, managed, bent into its proper use. From this conviction grew his first error, the belief that harmony required submission. He became a servant to Melkor, but more than that, a servant to his own ideal of control, a prisoner of his need to arrange all things beneath him. In the forging of Angband's vast machinery, in the ordering of armies, in the cunning of deceit, Sauron's brilliance shone with a terrible light. He was no brute like his master, but a maker, a planner, one who knew how to turn every chaos into system. To many he seemed almost merciful, for he did not always destroy. Often he organized, taught, and built. But beneath every gift lay a chain. He could not imagine a world outside dominion, and thus when he looked upon it, he saw only what could be ordered and what resisted him. Resistance he understood. It was indifference he could not abide. For this is the paradox that now begins to tighten. A being whose entire strength is rooted in control, who believes freedom is only disguised disorder, must someday confront one who embodies freedom not as rebellion, but as nature. When Sauron's gaze fell across Middle-earth, he saw kingdoms to rule, peoples to bind, forests to tame. But beyond the fields of war, and beyond the plans of both Valar and elves, there dwelt a figure whose very existence denied the logic of dominion. Not a warrior, not a rival, but something far more dangerous, a presence that did not yield because it had never entered the contest at all. Thus the shadow of Sauron lengthens as we move forward. His dominion will rise from Númenor's ashes. His ring will bind the wills of many, and his eye will pierce through darkness to search for all who might defy him. But before we follow that path, before we see the towers raised and armies march, we must pause in the silence where his vision could not reach. For the fear that would haunt him was not born on the battlefield, nor in the counsels of the wise, but in the realization that no matter how vast his power grew, there would remain a laughter in the forest, untouched, unbroken, and free. And so to understand the depth of his dread, we must turn now to that silence, to the strange immunity of the one who could not be moved. We paused in the stillness where Sauron's vision could not reach, and now we step inward without haste, listening for the note that sustains, without demanding to be heard. It is not absence. It is the fullness that arrives when contention tires, the hush after rain, when roots drink deeper than voices can tell. In that quiet stands one the river names with affection, and the hills accept as neighbor. The being whom the wise call eldest, because he simply arrived before arriving, became a contest. We approach as wanderers who did not know we were seeking him until the path softened under our feet. The old forest argues less the nearer we come. Branches remember to lift rather than claw. Shadow keeps its shape and forgets to frighten. Inside the low house, a song moves along rafters like wind along reeds. Bread waits patient on the table. Goldberry's laughter pours over the threshold the way water persuades stone to shine. To call him master is both right and misleading, for mastery implies ascent, and he does not climb. He is master as a river is master of its banks, by being more fully itself with every curve. He speaks, and the ground listens, not from fear, but recognition. If there is law here, it is the law of belonging. Things are good when they keep company. The willow is wicked because it broods alone. The barrow is cruel because it hoards yesterday. Time loosens its belt beside his hearth. An hour stretches but does not strain. He asks simple questions that notice you rather than investigate you. Which bend of the lane held mud? Which bird startled your thoughts, where your boot scraped a root? He admires a crafted trinket and returns it without desire. He hears a hidden ache and hums until it remembers how to breathe. His attention does not assemble information. It assembles presence, and presence under his roof is allowed to be unguarded. We hold up a small ring because the road, like iron filings to a lodestone, always curves toward it. Its glow stains the grain of the table with a narrow promise. What you cannot rule, you shall rule. What troubles you, you shall command. What eludes you, you shall summon by name. The ring is a theology of knots. It gathers loose ends and tightens them to a single intention. It asks for little at first, and never stops asking, until everything bends. He slips it on his finger with the same courtesy he gives any gift. He vanishes, because the rules say vanishing should follow. And then he reappears, because the rules do not apply. He laughs, but not at us. He laughs like a hillside in sudden sun, warm and without quarrel. The ring is no more to him than a coin bumped from a pocket. Its promise evaporates in a room where no one is counting. The machinery of compulsion cannot find purchase on a surface that refuses to be gear. This is not learned resistance. It is not armor forged against temptation. It is immunity born from indifference, which is stronger than endurance when the threat is desire. You cannot bribe a hunger that does not exist. You cannot frighten a heart that does not measure itself against your terror. His song meets the ring the way daylight meets a moth, without argument, without hatred, without acknowledgement that the flutter means to dim anything. Around his cottage, boundaries behave like living customs rather than hard fences. They invite more than forbid. Strangers are welcomed and corrected kindly, as a gentle hand guides a sleepwalker away from the stairs. The old forest murmurs with long hurt and old memory of axes, yet here those hurts are taught a softer language. Even old man Willow, whose heavy dreams try to smother breath, yields to a tune and a firm word, and remembers the companionship of wind. Goldberry moves through all this like reason carried on water. Where he is the assurance that good ground exists, she is the tender proof that it moves. She is not ornament nor subject, but the bright seam along which his belonging takes its shape. Their talk is ordinary and luminous. Their work is unhurried. Their welcome is a kind that suggests the world might prefer generosity, if only given the chance. Together they make the air remember what ease feels like. At dusk we follow him outside, when the tie between day and night loosens like a knotted lace. He sings a line, and evening answers. A thrush adjusts its call. The path chooses kindness toward weary ankles. Far off, the barrow wights misplace their mutterings, in a rhythm they cannot resent. No summons, and no threat, only pattern repaired. He knows the proper names of nearby things, and the nearby things remember the better manners of their making. Fairness requires we admit the edges of this serenity. His power is complete within its sphere. That is the first edge. Outside it he is less certain, not through weakness, but through principle. He will not extend himself as conquest. He will not annex peace. He knows what belongs with him, and what does not. In an age fond of banners, such knowing appears strange. The second edge is time. He moves within it as one, accompanied rather than pursued, which comforts travellers and confounds historians. Return, then, to the thought that troubles conquerors. What cannot be compelled need not be opposed. For a mind trained in domination, this is terrible news. If anywhere, however small, willing things answer to a different music, victory can never be total. Sauron's dread takes a first clear shape here, not as fear of defeat by arms, but as fear of incompletion. Across maps and centuries, a bright pocket of freedom would remain, unamended by triumph, unruined by loss, unbothered by spectacle. Attend closely to his laughter, for it is not mockery. It answers the world as it is rather than the world as someone wishes to arrange it. In the tomb is a memory, a stream deciding to bend around a rock instead of grinding it, a seed choosing patience after a late frost. His mirth is not blind to suffering. He rescues the lost, persuades trees to release sour dreams, quiets the jealous whispering of graves. Yet he will not become a general. He refuses to learn the grammar of command. Neighbors tell stories that smell of bread. A lost pony found nibbling clover near his door. A traveller woken from deadly sleep by a cheerful scold, a cairn that forgot its malice when he passed humming by. These tales do not compile into a legend of conquest. They arrange into a litany of repairs, of small balances restored. The pattern is gentle and cumulative. You do not notice the fear departing until you reach for it, and your hand closes on the ordinary miracle of enough. We should note how matter itself answers him. The door's latch understands courtesy. The kettle keeps a companionable simmer. Even the floorboards consent to our clumsy boots. None of this is enchantment in the marketplace sense. It is more like memory, as if the world remembers its intended conversation with itself and resumes it where it left off. In such a conversation, the ring has nothing to say. Its vocabulary is too narrow. It demands obedience in a language this valley does not speak. Night gathers, and the house glows like a lantern cupped in patient hands. We feel the question rising because it always rises. What is he, truly? He knows it before we ask. He paws, he smiles, he gestures toward a chair that forgives our wait. He tells a tale about a day when the river tried to remember the mountain, and the mountain tried to remember a cloud. When the story concludes, the question has drifted downstream with a pleasant tiredness, and does not insist on returning. We will leave in the morning. Paths beyond his fields remain tangled. Powers beyond this valley continue their negotiations of steel and will. He does not forbid our going. He blesses it with a half-song that will hang in the ankle when the way turns mean. If we lose it, water will help us find it again. If we keep it, we may discover that hard choices arrive carrying softer ones inside them, like secret pockets sewn into travel coats. Consider again the ring on the table, now lying quiet as if listening. It is not shamed by his indifference, for objects know nothing of shame. It is only made irrelevant. Its promise feels smaller because a larger promise has been demonstrated, that life can be whole without mastery. This is the line Sauron cannot cross, the line that does not appear on maps. His instruments bind the willing and the afraid, but they cannot bind the uncounting heart. The uncounting heart recognizes itself as sufficient. We look once more toward the trees and sense how they lean, less from obedience than from fellowship. The forest keeps its old temper, yet here it tests another mood and finds pleasure in it. The barrows persist in their grief, Yet here they misplace their purpose and search for it harmlessly until dawn. Nothing is erased, and nothing is conquered, and yet much is changed. The method is neither denial nor force. It is a steadfast return to the right relationship of neighboring things. We carry that gentleness like a quiet talisman. Sleep comes easily, and morning comes without fanfare. We share bread, and the path receives us like an old companion with a new patience. He asks nothing in return but attention. Notice what you are stepping on. Notice where the water wants to go. Notice which fear speaks with a voice you borrowed from someone else. These are not commands. They are reminders. They travel better than weapons, and last longer than proclamations, and they will not burden the next hand that carries them. The quiet handoff is upon us, and it must be honored. We have met the one who will not be moved, and we have felt how the world behaves when possession yields to presence. Yet the age into which we go is written in oaths, iron, and glyphs folded into a circle of gold. Before we can understand why the Dark Lord's most careful device falters at this threshold, we must examine the device itself, the logic by which it binds, and the accumulating price that logic demands. The ring lying quiet upon Bombadil's table is more than gold and craft. It is the concentrated essence of one will, drawn so tightly around itself that it hardens into permanence. To leave the house of Tom is to feel again the gravity of that essence. Outside, the trees resume their suspicion, the hills brood with old memories, and the air remembers how to weigh upon the heart. Bombadil's indifference is an island, but beyond its borders the full current of Sauron's dominion gathers momentum. To understand the force that even the wise dreaded, we must see how the Dark Lord forged his mastery into a device that would outlive flesh and command not only obedience, but desire. Sauron's power had always been about organization, about bending chaos into function. Under Melkor, he learned how fear could weld armies together, how terror could shape loyalty stronger than oaths, but fear alone scatters when the hand is removed. What he longed for was permanence, a way to bind not just outward behavior, but the very will within. And so, the craft that once delighted in structure turned toward something more perilous. With secret knowledge gleaned from the deep forges of the earth, and from arts that even Aula had not fully taught, he devised the rings of power. These were not mere ornaments, but instruments of alignment, bringing strength and longevity by offering fragments of another's design. Each one carried a hidden tether, unseen yet inescapable, by which Sauron could extend his own pattern into the choices of others. The One Ring was the culmination, the anchor through which every tether could be drawn taut. He did not merely make it as a tool, he poured himself into it, emptied his essence into the circle so that it would be more than artifact. In doing so, he achieved a terrible ingenuity. The ring was Sauron, and Sauron was the ring. Whoever bore it, even if only upon a chain, carried a fragment of his spirit, and thus carried the risk of alignment. Its voice whispered not in foreign commands, but in the familiar cadence of one's own desire, magnifying ambition until it seemed inevitable. To kings, it promised sovereignty secured, to warriors victory assured, to the weary rest without end. It spoke always in the tongue of the heart's hidden want. Yet this strength was also a narrowing. The ring's power was immense, only over those who recognized the contest of dominion, who lived by measures of possession and fear. Against the eldest, it slipped into irrelevance. For Bombadil did not measure his life in possession, nor did he imagine himself incomplete without mastery. Where others felt the lure of completion, he felt only curiosity, and when the trinket failed to compel, he set it aside without loss. This was Sauron's first true weakness laid bare. His weapon was meaningless where the hunger for dominion did not exist. The very perfection of his design assumed that all wills could be turned, that all hearts could be bent. One who simply did not bend revealed that his perfection was partial, his dominion incomplete. Still, beyond that singular immunity, the ring ruled nearly all. It was not brute force that made it dreadful, but the subtlety of its working. The more one resisted, the more it wove resistance into its pattern, offering compromise as if it were mercy. To fight it was to acknowledge it, and acknowledgement was the first step toward enthrallment. The wise feared it not because they were weak, but because they understood too well how easily knowledge could become justification. Gandalf refused it, Galadriel turned it away, Elrond counseled against it, all for the same reason. To accept it even for good would be to accept Sauron's logic of power. In that logic, Bombadil alone stood apart, not because he was stronger, but because he refused the terms of the game entirely. To the Free Peoples, the ring was a threat that could end their age. To Sauron, it was the safeguard of his very being. If it remained lost, he remained diminished, stretched thin, incapable of full form. If it returned, he would stand invincible, so long as wills could be bound. And yet, within this fortress of calculation, lay a hidden fissure, a truth he could not face, that one being could hold the ring in hand and laugh at it, neither strengthened nor weakened, simply unmoved. The ring was the perfection of Sauron's philosophy. Bombadil's indifference showed that philosophy to be neither universal nor absolute. This is why the wise debated but did not choose him as keeper. His indifference might preserve the ring, but it would not preserve the world. He could not be relied upon to guard what he did not value. If Sauron marched, Tom would remain in his valley, untouched but unhelping, the storm breaking around a stone in the river. Yet the fact of his immunity was enough to trouble even the Dark Lord. Victory, to be true, must be total. A single untouched witness is an indictment against all dominion. As we follow the thread from Bombadil's house into the wide lands of Middle-earth, the mechanism of Sauron's dominion becomes clearer. His armies are not merely legions of orcs and men. They are extensions of a will that denies the possibility of refusal. His fortresses are not only stone and iron, they are architectures of inevitability, designed to crush imagination into obedience. Yet one small pocket of laughter, one being beyond reach, revealed the lie. That inevitability was an illusion. And illusions, however vast, are fragile when truth persists beside them. So we arrive at a turning point. To see why Sauron feared Bombadil more than the Valar, we must now look not at armies or towers, but at the strange freedom of one who lived outside all covenants. For if the Valar themselves could be bound by law and limited by mandate, then what was the cost and the gift of Bombadil's detachment from every bond? If the ring was Sauron's perfect device, then the Valar were his perfect contrast. They were the appointed stewards of Arda, guardians of its order and beauty, yet even their power was bounded by laws older than themselves. Mandates from beyond the world shaped their role, drawing lines they could not cross without shattering the very harmony they served. Though they were mighty enough to humble Melkor when joined in strength, they were also constrained by their covenant to Eru, compelled to act not in dominion, but in stewardship. Their authority was vast, but it was never absolute. And herein lies a subtle truth. Even the Valar, who appeared as gods to elves and men, could be resisted by the stubborn will of those beneath them, or delayed by their own hesitations, their counsels, and their binding sense of restraint. Against such powers, Sauron could measure himself. He knew their limits, he knew the order by which they abided, and in that knowledge he felt the security of a game played within rules. For though he feared their wrath, he also trusted that wrath, too, remained tethered to a higher balance. To him, the Valar were predictable opponents, bound by the very harmony he despised, and so he could imagine strategies to defy them or endure until their eyes turned elsewhere. Their might was terrifying, but it was a terror calculable, an equation in which he could still maneuver. Tom Bombadil stood apart because he was bound to nothing. He had no mandate from the One, no stewardship defined by decree, no covenant tying him to elves or men, or even to the Valar themselves. He was the world before the mandates, the presence before the laws, where the Valar could be appealed to through prayers, or defied by defiance itself. Bombadil could not be invoked or compelled in any form. His freedom carried no agenda, and therefore no negotiation. That was his gift, but also his cost. For if he could never be conquered, he also could never be enlisted. He could neither be enemy nor ally in the strict sense, but only witness. To Sauron, this indifference was more terrifying than the wrath of the Valar. An enemy who fights you admits the struggle matters. Their opposition defines you as worthy of contest. But one who remains unbound, who will not even enter the field of conflict, dissolves the very foundation upon which dominion rests. If Bombadil did not care for mastery, then mastery itself was revealed as something less than universal. It became not the ultimate reality, but one choice among many, and this threatened Sauron in ways no sword could. And yet this same freedom estranged Bombadil from the counsels of the wise. When Elrond and Gandalf weighed what to do with the ring, they dismissed the thought of entrusting it to him, not because he was too weak, but because his detachment was too complete. He might let it lie in a drawer and forget it, or sing it into silence only within the bounds of his valley, but he would not guard it with vigilance, nor wield it against its maker. For the ring was a device of will, and Bombadil's will was not directed toward shaping history. The Valar, though constrained, still acted within the drama of ages. Tom stood beyond it, serene but irrelevant to its unfolding. The lesson lies heavy here. The Valar could be limited by law, Bombadil by disinterest. One force is checked by covenant, the other by freedom. Both leave space into which Sauron could stretch his power. Yet while the Valar's restraint allowed them still to intervene, Bombadil's indifference left him as a silent rebuke rather than a savior. His very existence was enough to reveal the limits of dominion, but his nature prevented him from changing its outcome. Sauron feared him not for what he might do, but for what he already was. He embodied the possibility that the world did not need conquering to endure, that time itself could hold without chains. And because he embodied it without effort, without struggle, it cast a long shadow across the Dark Lord's obsession. For if even one being lived content beyond dominion, then all of Sauron's striving became not absolute truth, but one fragile and desperate attempt at control. The Valar's stewardship framed the world in order. Bombadil's freedom unframed it entirely. Between them, Sauron found the shape of his prison, bound by law on one side, mocked by indifference on the other. To see this more clearly, we must now turn from mandates and covenants to the strange condition of Bombadil himself, who lived beyond the passage of time. For his timelessness, though it freed him from every shadow, carried a cost that few understood, and that deepened the nature of Sauron's dread. Time, as the Valar understood it, was a covenant, a way for change to keep faith with meaning. They shepherded ages like gardeners move through orchards, pruning gently, guiding patiently, trusting cycles to do their healing work. Bombadil lived beside that covenant without needing it. He did not resist time, and yet he did not submit to it. He stepped through seasons as a swimmer moves through water that never chills him, unhurried and unafraid, aware that the river flows, but unconcerned that it might carry him anywhere he does not choose to stand. When others measured years by victories and losses, he measured presence by presence. Morning was complete because it arrived. Evening was complete because it stayed. Between them, he sang. To say he was timeless does not mean that he ignored change. Leaves still fell, rivers still swelled and shrank, storms still broke branches and scattered nests. He noticed every shift, and he answered them with a practical tenderness that felt older than rules. A frost too hard for late blossoms earned a low song and a little extra patience near the hedge. A nesting bird found the branch steadied with a quiet word about wind. These were not miracles in the manner of myths. They were corrections in the manner of companionship. His power, if we are strict, was less a force than a climate, a steadiness in which things remembered their better shapes and resumed them without fuss. Yet timelessness carries a price that heroes seldom envy. To live beyond the river of before and after is to stand on a bank where legacy means little. Tales thrive on turning points, on the moments when courage wrestles doom and wins by inches. Tom's life offered few such angles. He rescued the lost because they were near and in need. He comforted the angry because anger, left alone, curdles. He kept the song of his valley in tune because songs unkept become noise. And when the work was finished, he did not make a proclamation. He put the kettle back upon its hook, asked whether boots had dried, and reminded a guest to mind the low lintel by the door. History, which prefers edges that cut, often hurries past kindnesses that mend. There is another cost, quieter and harder to name. His indifference to mastery freed him from the ring and from fear, but it also limited the range of his care. He loved what he could hold with his attention, and his attention was honest about distance. The far fields were loved as a promise of green, not as a set of responsibilities. Beyond his borders, his song thinned to politeness. It lent courage to the weary, without presuming to change the land beneath their feet. Some call that refusal a failing. Others call it fidelity to the law of belonging he lived by. Do not claim what you cannot accompany. Tighten your circle, and make its center kind. Because he was eldest, people wished him to be everything else as well. Judge, king, sentinel, storm. He would have been bad at those parts. Judgment requires a memory that weighs. He preferred a memory that listens. Kingship requires a hierarchy. He preferred a table. Sentinels thrive on vigilance. He trusted the path to announce its travelers well enough. Storms remake maps. He repaired footpaths. To his detractors, such choices smelled like negligence. To those who slept under his roof and woke without nightmares, they felt like the only durable kind of care. We should be fair and admit that even his timelessness sometimes looked like sorrow. He knew the grief of trees that had learned to mistrust axes, and the ache of hills that remembered foundations long removed. He could coax a willow away from spite for a night, and he could soothe a barrow's jealous murmur until dawn, but he could not remake the world so thoroughly that such griefs forgot their names. He accepted this without dramatics. His song did not deny darkness. It taught darkness a softer register, then left it to practice. The practice often took a long time. Time, after all, was abundant to him, but it was not infinitely negotiable for those who travelled onwards with shorter candles. Consider how the hours behave in his company. The past does not crowd the present with accusation. The future does not lean forward and demand to be planned. You feel the weight that time usually places on shoulders slide instead into the floorboards, which creak once, agree, and bear it for you. In such relief, resolve arrives without the grind of anxiety. Choices declare themselves at their proper scale. The small choice to rest before the gate. The small choice to return a borrowed thing. The small choice to speak gently to a frightened pony. Those small choices accumulate into a shape that more aggressive histories rarely notice. A durable, survivable good. This is precisely where Sauron's dread deepens. His philosophy requires that only grand designs matter, that must harden into structures and bend weaker wills into alignment. Bombadil's immunity exposes a split. There exists a way for meaning to accumulate without being commanded, for safety to emerge without conquest. If that is true anywhere, then the claim that dominion is necessary becomes a nervous opinion rather than a law. The Dark Lord could endure defiance, because defiance is a mirror that shows him large. He could not endure irrelevance, because irrelevance makes mirrors unnecessary. You can see now why the wise did not place the ring in Tom's care. It would have been safe from corruption, but not safe from neglect. He would have treated it like a loose tooth, inconvenient at the table, a thing you absent-mindedly tongue, then forget until it bothers you again. The fate of peoples would not force his attention to sharpen. He would not plan campaigns of guarding. He would not spend dawns counting sentries and evenings calculating contingencies. He would move through his day as he always had, and the circle of gold would remain a circle of gold, which is to say, nothing. This is not cruelty. It is coherence. He refuses to abandon the logic that makes his valley gentle, even to save a wider world that insists upon sharper tools. We may suspect, though we cannot prove, that his timelessness is anchored to place, not to maps, which change with rulers and ruin, but to relations, tree to river, stone to root, bird to hollow, door to threshold, host to guest. He is oldest where that web holds dense and articulate, where each thing knows the others by the right names and answers to them without confusion. Far from that web, his voice thins, because the names thin. A mountain that has been strip-mined and renamed 20 times in the tongue of prophet remembers fewer syllables. A river that has been turned through 100 angled channels to feed invisible mills forgets how to describe itself to reeds. In such places his song can still comfort a traveller. It cannot, by itself, restore the conversation the land no longer remembers it wanted. To live outside time as event does not mean living outside time as care. He keeps routines with the devotion of a monk whose vows include the happiness of kettles. Tools are repaired before they break. Paths are walked before brambles feel neglected. Storm gutters are cleared so that floods have no excuse to practice the wrong kind of haste. This maintenance, humble and cyclical, is the hidden heart of his strength. Neglect is how small harm becomes large tragedy. Care is how small good becomes durable shelter. The ledger of his days looks like a list of almost nothings. It is, in truth, the scaffolding of peace. There is an old story he tells only when asked softly. A traveller once begged him to come far away, to a city where a ruler's cruelty was stamping laughter flat. Tom listened, offered bread, and asked the traveller to sleep. At dawn, he walked with the traveller to the edge of his boundary and taught him a tune. The traveller wept, angry at what felt like refusal. Years later, the city's cruelty ended not by invasion, but by a famine of obedience. Songs were sung in kitchens that made fear forget its steps. The traveller returned, older and smiling, with hands calloused from mending doors others had kicked. He asked Tom whether the tune had done it. Tom shook his head and asked what the traveller had fed his neighbours during the worst week. The answer was lentils and onions, and then silence, and then laughter. Tom said that sounded right. If you seek tragedy in him, you will not find spectacles. You will find a gentler recognition. He knows that to be untouched by time's wear is to be uninvited to time's triumphs. He does not march in the parades of victory because he does not march. He waves from a gate that always opens inward, so that the weary do not have to push hard. When songs are written about great rescues, his name appears in a verse about hospitality, and minstrels move along because the audience, trained to wait for thunder, cannot hear the rain. And yet, the cost purchased something that the desperate cannot counterfeit. In his presence, futures stop bargaining with fear. Choices return to their human size. A hobbit can refuse a ring and mean it because he has slept where possession is uninteresting. A wizard can step back from greatness because he has watched kettles steam without envy. A ranger can forget a crown long enough to remember how to be a friend. None of these are accidents. They are the driftwood of his timelessness, small, polished, and strong enough to float a heart across a dark reach. He knows the border of his gift. He does not pretend to cure the world. He does not pretend that songs alone will quiet every barrow or teach every willow to prefer patience. He does not confuse calm with safety or kindness with victory. He merely insists that meaning does not need permission from power to exist, and that any house can begin again at the table. This insistence, kept without bitterness over uncounted years, is the bravest thing about him. It is also the thing most likely to be overlooked by storytellers who love banners. From this vantage, Sauron's fear appears in its true shape. He feared not Bombadil's strength, which was localized and modest, but Bombadil's demonstration that a world could be whole without his arrangements. If there exists even one enduring circle of contentment beyond the reach of command, then command will never be the final song. The Dark Lord, who sought to convert every living choice into a cog within his device, could not absorb a laughter that did not run on gears. And so, The thread carries us gently to the places where his timelessness meets stubborn hurt, where his presence does not erase danger, but changes its posture. The old forest waits with its slow grudges. The Barrow Downs hold their cold hordes of yesterday, there among roots and stones that remember unkind lessons too well. His refusals and his repairs take their most visible forms. There, a willow dreams badly and must be awakened. There, a mound murmurs about treasure and needs reminding that memory cannot own the living. There is where we go next, into the green dusk and low hills, to watch how his song behaves when the shadows answer back. We go, as promised, into the green dusk and low hills, where the path remembers old quarrels and the air frets over unsorted memories. The old forest receives us in its sullen grammar, branches knitting and unknitting, as though the canopy were deciding, moment by moment, whether travellers count as insult or invitation. At first the ground argues with our ankles, and roots reach like questions that never expect answers. Then something familiar slips along the bark, a tone we recognize from the kettle and the table and the easy door. It is not a command. It is a patient meter that reminds the place of itself. Leaves settle. The path becomes a statement instead of a complaint. We feel the forest trying on a calmer thought, and finding it not entirely disagreeable. A deeper in, where a wide, elderly willow nurses the kind of grudge that can stain water, the old hurt shows its shape. The tree is not a villain in the way battles prefer, but a memory that has hardened into appetite. Its roots hoard damp, and its trunk leans like a tired magistrate, unwilling to forgive those who do not know the old laws. Travellers drowse where they should not, and the water learns to hold breath longer than is kind. Tom arrives without hurry, as if summoned not by alarm, but by the valley's courtesy. He does not scold the tree as an enemy. He names it in a voice that offers companionship, and in the naming he remembers the first agreement between wind and wood, that shade should be rest, not trap. The willow resists as habit resists correction, then loosens as a knot loosens when a patient finger finds the right thread. The water releases its sleepers, the trunk adjusts its sulk to an acceptable sulk, and the forest, grateful for a little dignity restored, allows the day to proceed. What looks like command from a distance feels, up close, like repair. He tunes a mood rather than breaks a will. The method travels on rhythm and proper naming, not spells that seize, but songs that remind. Where fear spreads as fast as rumour, his voice spreads as slowly as trust. And somehow, this is the speed that holds. The lesson is not that malice vanishes. It is that malice grows bored when the environment stops agreeing with it. Even the worst tempers tire if no one rehearses them. The low hills to the east hold a different kind of grievance. The Barrow Downs keep company with fog, and the fog keeps company with yesterday. Here the ground remembers treasures that were supposed to anchor memory, and instead imprisoned it. Cold lives there that prefers arrangement over life. A cold that sorts bones by importance, and crowns by brightness, and refuses to hear that morning continues whether or not it approves. Travellers who wander too near feel the polite hand of sleep turned into the rude hand of possession. Voices there practice the old persuasion that you belong to what you regret. He steps among these mounds with the same unarmed composure he brings to the willow. He does not bargain with the fog or flatter the stones. He speaks to the hill until the hill can hear again. He sings in a key that expects sunlight and acts accordingly. The barrow's door, which has been practicing the closed, stubborn shape of a mouth that hoards, forgets itself, and yawns like a gate. Light enters, not as a weapon, but as a remembered habit. The chill that loves counting loses track of numbers. A presence that had mistaken custody for purpose loosens like an old belt after a long fast. He does not lecture the white about justice. He introduces it to air. The hoarded brilliance, polished by hands that do not live, stops pretending to be meaning. It becomes objects again, and objects, relieved, prefer to be used or buried properly, not worshipped. We should be precise about his restraint. He frees those caught in a single mound, and does not set out to cleanse every hill in a campaign. He returns what can be returned, commends what cannot to the next honest morning, and resists the grand appetite to rename a land in one afternoon. There are limits he will not cross, not because he cannot, but because crossing them would repeat the crime in another key. He refuses to let rescue become conquest. He refuses to let repair become rule. He teaches the living to run toward sun, and he teaches the hill to admit that a door is better as a door than as a verdict. You notice, walking back with him, how the world recalibrates around such choices. Trees hold their opinions more quietly. Grasses resume their conversational sway. The very idea of force seems clumsy beside the ease with which attention changes outcomes. Attention in his hands is not scrutiny, but hospitality, an invitation for things to be themselves in their best behavior. Sauron's arithmetic, which relies upon pressure and the multiplication of fear, cannot solve a problem where the variable is welcome. He will always ask how many guards and how high a wall, and the valley answers, gently, that the right number is sometimes a table's worth, and the right height barely a threshold. Across these casework hours, a mechanism reveals itself with more clarity than in councils or chronicles. The willow did not cease to be strong. It merely remembered what strength is for. The barrow did not forget the dead. It remembered that memory is a garden, not a lock. Bombadil's song provides the condition under which right use becomes easier than mischief. In such a climate, the ring has no function. It cannot enhance what does not measure itself by enhancement. It cannot tempt what has no gap where temptation can wedge. The object whose entire grammar declares that power is the solution finds itself unable to conjugate a single verb in a place arranged for fellowship. And yet he remains particular. He cares most for what he can accompany. This is the standard that governs his interventions: proximity, relation, the promise of being able to keep company with what he mends. When a stranger asks whether he will march far and adjudicate distant wrongs, he smiles the way a lamp smiles at a storm report. He will listen. He will feed. He will teach, a tune that leaves with the traveler and behaves in kitchens. But he will not crown himself necessary to a place he does not know by name. The result is a small geography of miracles, and a large geography encouraged to help itself. Sauron misreads this as weakness, because his vision cannot distinguish humility from vacancy. To him, a boundary is an admission that one's will has failed to expand completely. To Tom, a boundary is where courtesy grows. It is where you ask permission to enter, where you choose to be a guest rather than a conqueror. The old forest, under his attention, learns to host rather than ambush. The barrow downs, under his voice, learn to mourn rather than possess. These are not headlines in the histories that love lists of kings, yet they are the quiet algebra by which safety adds up. Along the way, small parables arrange themselves without effort. A pony forgotten by fear finds clover and remembers it likes sweetness more than panic. A lantern left on a mound while the sun was being persuaded to visit remembers to burn modestly and not pretend to be a sun itself. A traveler who had rehearsed a speech of gratitude yields to tired laughter and eats. The pattern is consistent. Where his presence enters, exaggeration loses its appetite. Things stop pretending to be more than they are, and thus become again the kind of more that grows from honesty. We are tempted to ask why he does not multiply himself. Why not teach 100 more to sing as he sings, and spread 100 valleys like this across a map that aches for them? He would answer by offering tea, and by asking whether you remember the name of the last stone you stepped on. Multiplication without memory becomes system, and system, unattended, invites the same cold efficiencies that made the barrows hungry. He will teach anyone who lingers long enough to learn, but he will not train an army of kindness. Armies, even of kindness, take orders too well. By now, the shape of Sauron's fear is no longer a rumor, but a profile you could sketch with your eyes closed. He can dominate the willing and the weary. He can terrify the ambitious into obedience. He can burn a forest until it obeys the logic of ash. But he cannot command a laughter that owes him nothing, and he cannot garrison every valley against the possibility that neighbors will remember how to be neighbors. His instruments of mastery falter wherever meaning is produced by presence rather than imposed by plan. For a mind that requires completeness, a single intact pocket of immunity is an abyss. We walk the boundary home at dusk, and the day signs its neat signature across the ridge. He does not ask for thanks. He asks whether we noticed the moment when the barrow changed its mind. We think we did. It might have been the breath before the door unlatched. It might have been the crease of light discovering a seam. He nods, satisfied that attention was paid, and then worries aloud about a missing hen. The grandeur of rescue dissolves correctly into chores. This is the punctuation his valley prefers. Events become errands, and errands become care, and care becomes a condition under which the next danger looks less like an emergency and more like a problem that will answer to patience. As we ready ourselves to leave, the ring-shaped question returns with its exact, cool contour. If one being can hush ancient malice, wake sleepers from jealous soil, and laugh at a device that ensnared kings, why not entrust that device to him? Why not place the peril where peril starves, hide the bait where appetite refuses it, and let the age continue while his door forgets to lock? The wise asked this in their own way, weighing hope against doubt, and arrived at a decision that disappointed those who love shortcuts. Before we can accept their reasoning without resentment, we must examine the strange arithmetic of trust and the particular limits of a freedom that refuses custody. The quiet decision to leave the ring with no one at all is a choice that ripples far beyond the borders of Tom's valley. Though he is the one who does not need it, the wisdom of the wise is still laced with a quiet reluctance. They see the threat in the ring clearly, but they also see the cost of entrusting its care to one who cannot care for it the way they expect. Tom would not pursue its destruction, nor would he wear it with the vigilance they would, but the ring could not be left to wander freely. It could not be ignored. even in the hand of one so unbothered by its call, the weight it carried in the world was too great, too dangerous, even if its bearer would not be swayed by it. The struggle of the ring is not just in the hand that holds it, but in the shadow it casts over everything that interacts with it. And Tom, for all his understanding of freedom, knew this truth. For Sauron's ring was not merely an object, it was an extension of his power. It was the extension of his very being, a piece of his soul made to dominate and corrupt. Those who could resist its lure could still feel its influence, for even the smallest whisper of his presence in the world was enough to change everything. Sauron had designed the ring to bend reality to his will, and so, despite Tom's ability to laugh at its presence, even he could not ignore the fact that it was a reminder of something far darker, a force that could be set loose by an accident or an unintended decision. Though Tom's resistance was complete, his indifference was still a kind of isolation. And isolation, when placed in the context of a world filled with ambition and hunger, can breed an unwelcome silence. Tom's indifference to the ring was not an act of rebellion or denial of the world's needs, but rather a statement of an untouched truth that did not fit within Sauron's framework of domination. The wise saw this indifference as both a strength and a danger. They knew that the ring needed to be actively opposed, not ignored. In Tom's refusal to claim it, in his casual dismissal of its power, they saw the reflection of a world that did not need to be saved, one where history could progress without violence or control, where things could remain in a delicate balance, free from the weight of conquest. This is why the council rejected him, not because he was incapable, but because his refusal to participate in the greater war of wills was a declaration of something even more terrifying, something that, when left unchecked, could allow Sauron's designs to unravel, not by force, but by simply being overlooked and left to fade. This indifference was the lesson that many in Middle-earth could not yet learn, though some came close. The hobbits, in their small and humble lives, understood in part what Tom Bombadil did, for their lives were filled with the same quiet rhythms. Their desires were smaller, and their actions more in tune with the land than with the forces that sought to control it. Sauron could never see them as a threat, because they lived outside the map of power. It was this smallness, this irrelevance to Sauron's calculations, that allowed them to stand apart. And yet, even the hobbits could not remain completely untouched. The ring needed to be destroyed, and the fate of the world depended not on one individual, but on the collective refusal to be swayed by its tempting promises. As we move further into the story, the lingering question is not just how the ring will be destroyed, but why it was so dangerous in the first place. It was not just the potential to wield power, it was the very idea that someone could claim power over time, over others, and over fate itself. The ring held within it the illusion of mastery, the promise that all things could be controlled, and that time itself could be shaped into a perfect image of one's will. Bombadil, by his very existence, reminded Sauron that this illusion was just that, an illusion. The ring's power could not be undone by simple force, nor by rejection alone. It needed to be cast out, not because it was evil, but because it was a distortion of what should be, a weapon designed to bind the world in the name of security. But in reality, it was the greatest creator of suffering. As long as the ring remained, it would persist, corrupting everything it touched, feeding off the very desire to destroy it. It could not be bargained with. It could only be released from the world, cast away, so that those who sought to live by their own terms could continue without being swept up in a pattern that belonged to no one, but that everyone still struggled against. Thus, the decision to leave the ring with Bombadil was not a failure to act, but a recognition that there are forces in this world that transcend the need for control. The true danger of the ring lay not in its power, but in its capacity to warp every intention toward the singular goal of domination. By leaving it with Bombadil, the council took the first step toward understanding that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the refusal to join the war at all, and in the recognition that freedom, true freedom, is not in the ability to choose between victory and defeat, but in the ability to remain unchanged no matter the circumstance. Bombadil, for all his simplicity, held a deeper wisdom than any who would rise to fight. His freedom was not an illusion. It was a truth that could not be bargained away. He was the anchor of possibility in a world that often forgets the weight of such an anchor. And in his freedom, there was no chain to be broken, no need to conquer, no victory to claim. His power was in the freedom from power, and in this he revealed the one thing that Sauron could never claim: a life lived without fear. As we leave Bombadil's realm, the quiet truth of his existence lingers. He remains untouched, a reminder that the struggle for power is not the only path forward. The world will continue its march, the battles will rage, but in the depths of the forests, in the corners of the valleys where few tread, the laughter of one who is free remains. And with that, the stage is set for the next act of the great drama. A decision must be made, not by power, but by trust. The ring will move again, and so must its keepers. But the question remains, can they hold their ground, or will they too be swept away in the torrent of power that Sauron set in motion so long ago? With Bombadil's valley receding behind us, the world begins to shift, not abruptly, but with the quiet inevitability of a turning tide. The decision has been made, and the path is set. The ring is no longer merely an object to be possessed or ignored. It is now a moving force, carried by a fellowship that is not yet certain of its destination, but is aware of the gravity of the journey. With each step away from the heart of the forest, we feel the tension of the moment deepen. The world, in all its beauty and tragedy, draws us toward the great conflict, the looming battle between domination and freedom, between the desire for control and the choice to live outside the grasp of power. The weight of the ring grows heavier, not because of its physical presence, but because of the choices it demands from those who bear it. It whispers promises, the same promises it made to every previous wielder, a whisper that is never truly silenced. But here, on the borders of Tom Bombadil's domain, the true challenge begins. Not just the journey through lands scarred by war and darkened by Sauron's reach, but the inner journey of the Fellowship itself. Each member, even the smallest, is touched by the weight of the ring. The pull toward domination, the desire for control, is woven into the very fabric of their beings, and the ring knows how to exploit that thread, how to stretch it just enough to make it feel like a second skin. It is here, on the open road, that we begin to see how far Sauron's shadow extends. It is not just in the armies he commands, nor the fear he spreads across the land. His true power lies in his ability to twist desire itself, to make all who encounter him want more than they need. It is this seduction, the quiet tug of the ring, that tests the fellowship. For it is not enough to travel through enemy lands, to face armies and monsters. The greatest danger is within, the slow erosion of will, the subtle tug toward domination that lures each member into thinking that they might wield the ring for good, for a noble purpose. This is the real temptation, the real danger. Frodo, as the bearer of the ring, feels its weight most keenly. He does not seek power, does not crave dominion. But the ring does not care. It seeks to bend him, not with force, but with the sweet promise that he alone can wield it, that he alone can use it to bring about peace, to defeat Sauron. This is the cruel trick it plays. It gives the illusion of control, the illusion of power without the cost, at least not at first. And as the journey progresses, we begin to see the subtle ways in which the ring tests the very fabric of their resolve. The temptation is not a loud call, but a quiet whisper, a suggestion here and there, a gentle persuasion. But even as the ring pulls at them, the world around them remains constant, steadfast. The land is wide, and the mountains call to those who have the strength to climb. The wind blows through the grass, and the stars shine in the night sky. These are the things that cannot be dominated, the things that remain untouched by the reach of Sauron. And it is in these moments, these quiet moments, that the true strength of the fellowship reveals itself. Not in the power of the ring, but in the resolve to keep walking forward, to keep fighting not just for the destruction of the ring, but for the preservation of what is good in the world. For even in the face of Sauron's darkness, the light still exists, even if it flickers weakly in the distance. It is not just the ring that makes the journey difficult, but the weight of their choices. As they walk, each member of the fellowship faces a decision. Will they bend to the ring's call, or will they remain true to the path, to the mission that unites them? It is a question that goes beyond the immediate struggle. It is about the choices that define them as individuals, as members of a world that still holds the possibility of peace, of freedom, of balance. Every step forward is a step toward a greater understanding of themselves, of what they are willing to sacrifice, of what they are willing to fight for. The journey is no longer just a physical one. It is a journey of the heart, of the spirit, a journey that will test their resolve, their honor, and their ability to remain true to the ideals they hold dear. They are not just fighting against Sauron. They are fighting against the very temptation of the ring, the temptation to believe that power is the answer to every question, the belief that to control is to win. As the fellowship moves further into the land of shadow, the tension rises, not because the armies of Sauron grow larger, but because the struggle within each of them grows more intense. The ring is a reflection of their inner desires, a mirror that shows them not who they are, but who they might become if they allow the temptation to take hold. It is the struggle of every soul who has ever faced the choice between domination and freedom, between control and release. And yet, even as the darkness grows deeper, the light persists. It is in the courage of the smallest among them, in the quiet moments of bravery that do not require applause, in the decisions that go unnoticed, but are the true markers of who they are. Frodo, burdened by the weight of the ring, still moves forward, not because he has the strength to carry it, but because he understands that the journey is not just about destroying the ring. It is about preserving the hope that the world can be free from the shadow of domination. As they approach the next stage of their journey, the weight of the ring becomes even more apparent. They must confront not only the forces of darkness, but the darkness within themselves. The true test is not in defeating Sauron, but in remaining true to themselves, in not losing sight of the light that still shines in the world, even in the darkest times. The ring may tempt them, but it is their strength of will, their unity, and their commitment to each other that will carry them through. The path ahead is long, and the journey is far from over. But one thing is clear: the strength to defeat Sauron will not come from the ring, nor from the armies they assemble, but from the choices they make along the way. In the end, it will be their courage, their resilience, and their refusal to be swept away by the currents of power that will determine the fate of Middle-earth. The journey, which began so quietly in the peaceful corners of Middle-earth, now stretches before the Fellowship with a weight that seems to grow heavier with each passing mile. The mountains rise in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist, and the land between them is slowly turning into a battleground, not of armies, but of wills. The further they go, the more palpable the tension becomes. The ring, once a distant object of dread, now seems to pulse with a life of its own, a constant presence that cannot be ignored. Even in the moments of silence, its call is felt, though no words are spoken. It is a pull that cannot be resisted, a temptation that lingers on the edge of every decision, every action. And it is not just the ring that burdens the Fellowship. Each step forward takes them deeper into Sauron's reach, into lands that have long since been claimed by his shadow. The world around them grows darker, more oppressive. The trees bend low as though they too feel the weight of the darkness creeping ever closer. The very earth seems to tremble beneath their feet, as if even the land itself fears what is to come. Every sound seems muffled, every breath feels more labored, and the sky itself seems to hang low, heavy with the anticipation of what is to come. Yet even amidst the growing darkness, the light that Tom Bombadil had shown them remains in their hearts, a flicker of hope that refuses to be extinguished. It is in the small, quiet acts of kindness between them, in the moments of solidarity that remind them of who they are and why they walk this path together. They are not alone. They may be faced with the greatest evil the world has ever known, but they are united in a cause that transcends the weight of the ring. In this unity, in their shared purpose, they find strength, even when it seems that everything around them is designed to break them apart. The ring, however, does not relent. It whispers, beckoning, drawing each member of the Fellowship into a battle of wills that is fought silently within their hearts. It is no longer just a thing to be carried. It has become a question, a challenge that each of them must face. For even though Frodo bears it, even though the weight of it presses down upon him more than any of them could know, the temptation is not limited to him alone. The ring does not choose its bearers. It seeks the heart that can be bent, the soul that can be swayed. And each member of the Fellowship, from the brave Aragorn to the wise Gandalf, is faced with the question: how far will you go for the sake of what is right? How far will you go to resist the allure of power? It is a question that weighs heavily on them all. Aragorn, the heir to a throne that is long forgotten, feels the pull of destiny, the weight of his lineage, and the responsibility that comes with it. But with that destiny comes the temptation to claim power for himself, to take the throne that is rightfully his. Gandalf, who has known the weight of power for so long, is ever wary of the subtle dangers that the ring poses, even to those who think themselves immune. Legolas, whose loyalty to his friends is unwavering, and Gimli, whose sense of honor runs deep, each struggle with their own personal demons, their own desires and doubts. And even Boromir, whose heart yearns to save his people and protect his city, is pulled toward the ring's promise of strength and glory. They are each tested in their own way, not by Sauron's forces, but by the quiet, insidious whispers of the ring. Its presence begins to shape their thoughts, their actions. They begin to see their own desires reflected in its promise of power, and they begin to wonder if the world might be better off if they were the ones to wield it, if they were the ones to control the fate of Middle-earth. The very nature of the ring, its ability to twist and manipulate, is what makes it so dangerous. Not because it forces its will upon them, but because it allows them to believe that they are in control, that they are choosing. And so they continue, step by step, drawn forward by their mission, but also by the darker forces that now stir within them. They are not just walking toward Mordor, they are walking toward a point of no return, toward a confrontation with the very nature of power itself. The questions they ask themselves now are no longer just about defeating Sauron. They are about who they are becoming as they carry the weight of the ring. What will they become when the dust settles and the battle is over? Will they be the heroes they imagine themselves to be? Or will they be something else entirely, something darker, something corrupted by the very power they sought to destroy? Frodo, in particular, feels the weight of this the most. He is the bearer of the ring, and yet he is also the one most untouched by the desire for power. His heart, though burdened, remains pure, and it is this purity that allows him to resist, at least for now. But as the journey continues, even his resolve begins to falter. The ring doesn't demand domination. It simply requires surrender, the surrender of the self. It whispers to Frodo that he is the only one who truly understands its power, that he alone can wield it for good, that he alone can end Sauron's reign. It is a seductive promise, one that he must fight against with every ounce of his being. In these quiet moments, when the ring's call grows louder, we see the true nature of the struggle. It is not just a battle against Sauron's armies, it is a battle for the soul of each member of the Fellowship, a battle for their very essence. And as they walk deeper into the land of shadow, they must confront the ultimate question. Can they remain true to themselves, or will the ring's whispers drive them to become something they can never undo? They continue their journey, not because they know the way, but because they must. And though the world around them darkens, though the ring continues to pull at their hearts, there is still a flicker of light, however faint, that keeps them moving forward. It is the light of hope, of friendship, of the belief that even in the darkest of times, even when all seems lost, there is always a chance for redemption, a chance for something greater than the power they seek to conquer. And so they press on, step by step, drawn toward the heart of Mordor, toward the moment that will define them all, and define the fate of Middle-earth itself. The weight of the ring grows, not in size or substance, but in the way it begins to press on every thought, every decision, every relationship within the Fellowship. The deeper they travel into the heart of Sauron's realm, the more the shadows grow, not just in the land around them, but within themselves. The land of Mordor itself feels alive with hostility, the air heavy with a suffocating presence that makes the very act of breathing feel like a struggle. It is as though the land, with its barren fields and twisted rock, is aware of their every move, of every hesitation, every wavering step. But it is not just the land that opposes them. It is the quiet, insidious force that rides on the back of the ring, slipping into their hearts, warping their intentions. Frodo feels it most keenly. He bears the ring, and though his will has held strong thus far, there are moments now when even he is not sure how much longer he can endure. The whispers are louder than ever. They are not demands, not commands, but invitations, subtle calls to power, promises of a world reshaped, a world where Sauron's dominion could be cast aside and replaced with something greater, something under Frodo's control. The temptation is not a sudden thing. It is a creeping sensation that builds like a slow fever, a desire to hold the ring not for himself, but for the good of the world, for the good of his friends, for the good of Middle-earth. In his heart, Frodo knows that he is not meant to keep the ring. But the temptation is not one of selfishness. It is the illusion of nobility, the whisper that he alone can carry it to the end, that he alone can bear the burden and ensure its destruction. But as Frodo wrestles with these thoughts, the weight of the ring presses harder, and the others begin to feel its effects too. Aragorn, though he has lived his life knowing that he is the heir to a throne, begins to see the ring not as a tool to defeat Sauron, but as something that could help him claim what he has long been denied, the kingship of Gondor. It is not an immediate desire, not a craving for power, but a sudden understanding of the possibilities that the ring offers. If he were to wield it, he could command the armies of Middle-earth, unite the scattered kingdoms, and finally take his place as the king he was always meant to be. The temptation grows silently, but it is there, lurking in the back of his mind, waiting for a moment of weakness. Gandalf, too, feels the pull. He is the wisest among them, the one who understands the danger of the ring better than anyone. But even he is not immune to its call. The ring promises knowledge, knowledge that could defeat Sauron once and for all. It whispers of wisdom that could bring peace, of power that could shape the world into something better. Gandalf's thoughts are heavy with the weight of his responsibility to protect Middle-earth, and the ring's promise of a quick and definitive end to Sauron's reign is alluring, even to him. But he resists, for he knows that this is the very temptation he must avoid. To wield the ring, even for good, would mean to become something like Sauron himself, a being bound to the same insidious desire for control. As they march on, the land of Mordor grows ever closer, and the choices before them become sharper, more defined. The darkness grows thicker, and with it, the sense that time is running out. The forces of Sauron are moving, and the weight of his will is pressing down on every corner of Middle-earth. But even as the darkness gathers, there is a flicker of light in the hearts of the Fellowship. They are not the only ones affected by the ring's power. Each of them, in their own way, must grapple with the temptation it offers. They must decide whether they will succumb to it, or whether they will stand firm, united in their mission to destroy it. Frodo, though he bears the ring, is not alone in his struggle. He is surrounded by friends, by allies who, despite their own doubts and desires, are willing to support him. They understand that the ring cannot be destroyed alone, that its power can only be broken through a unity, through the strength of those who refuse to be swayed by its influence. Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, and even Sam. All of them have been tested in ways they never imagined. They have fought battles, faced enemies, and overcome obstacles. But the true test is ahead of them. The struggle for the ring is not just a physical battle. It is a battle of wills, a battle against the very nature of power itself. And yet, even as they approach the final stages of their journey, even as the end of the ring's power looms closer, the danger is not gone. The closer they come to Mount Doom, the more intense the struggle becomes. The land itself seems to fight against them, as if Sauron's presence is pushing back against their every step. It is not just the ring that is dangerous. It is the corruption that it brings, the way it seeps into their thoughts, their dreams, and their actions. It twists their intentions, turning even their noblest desires into potential weaknesses. The Fellowship is no longer just a group of friends fighting against an enemy. They are now a collective of individuals fighting against the very thing that threatens to undo them, the ring, and the power it represents. But there is one final hope, one final chance for redemption. It lies not in the power of the ring, but in the power of choice. The Fellowship may not be able to destroy Sauron alone, but together they can resist the ring's influence. Together, they can stand firm in the face of darkness and hold on to the light that still exists within them. For though the ring may seek to dominate them, they are not defined by its power. They are defined by their ability to choose to fight for what is good, to choose to stand together in the face of the greatest evil the world has ever known. And so, as they march toward Mount Doom, the true battle begins. It is not a battle of armies or weapons, but a battle of hearts, a battle of resolve. Will they be able to resist the ring's call? Will they be able to hold on to the hope that has carried them this far? The answer lies not in the strength of their arms, but in the strength of their wills, and in that strength they will either find their victory or be consumed by the very power they sought to destroy. The final steps toward Mount Doom feel as though the weight of the entire world is pressing against them. The land around them is an oppressive, barren landscape, a stark reminder of Sauron's corrupting influence, as though the very earth itself has been drained of hope, of light, of life. Every step feels heavier, as though the journey itself is pulling them into the darkness. And yet, despite the suffocating atmosphere, there is a strange sense of unity among the Fellowship, a quiet resilience that binds them together. They are not the same group that set out from Rivendell, full of uncertainty, but united in purpose. They are now tested in ways they never imagined, forced to confront their own fears, their own desires, and their own potential for corruption. Each of them feels the ring's pull, but none more so than Frodo. He carries it with him, its weight ever present, pressing down on his mind, his heart, his very soul. The temptation grows as the ring's whispers grow louder, the promise of power, of control, offering itself as a solution to every problem they face. But Frodo's heart, despite the burden, remains strong. He knows the stakes, he knows the cost. Yet, as he looks to his friends, he begins to question whether they truly understand what this journey is costing him, what it is costing them all. They may be with him, but it is he who must bear the ring, and in bearing it, he is becoming something different, something distant from the world they fight for. The others, too, feel the pull in their own ways. Aragorn, who has long lived with the weight of his heritage, now sees the ring not as a tool of conquest, but as a means to unite the scattered lands of Middle-earth. The temptation to claim it, to wield it for the greater good of his people, is strong, even for him. But deep inside, he knows the truth. To wield the ring, even for noble purposes, is to become something else entirely. A ruler who must demand obedience, a king who cannot afford to show mercy, a person whose every decision is guided by the very power they seek to destroy. Gimli and Legolas, though they remain loyal to Frodo, are not immune to the allure of the ring. For Gimli, it represents strength, a tool to ensure that his people will survive, that their lands will be protected. For Legolas, the ring offers the promise of peace, a way to bring an end to the ceaseless war between elves and dwarves. Even Boromir, who has long struggled with his own pride and fear for his people, feels the pull, the temptation to seize the ring, to claim it for Gondor, to use it as a weapon against the darkness that has long threatened his city. But in their hearts, they know that to take the ring would mean to become the very thing they seek to fight. The ring is not merely an object, it is a force that seeks to corrupt, to twist the intentions of those who come into contact with it. It whispers in their minds, offering solutions, promises of victory, of control. It does not matter that their intentions are pure. Sauron's gift is never truly a gift, and those who seek to wield the ring will always be bent to its will. Even the most noble of intentions can be warped by the promise of power. And so they press on, each of them burdened by the weight of their choices, their desires, their fears. The land around them grows ever darker, the air thick with the scent of ash and decay. The very sky seems to close in on them, the clouds swirling like smoke, the sun hidden behind an oppressive haze. There is no beauty here, no respite, only the constant pressure of the ring's presence, the knowledge that they are walking into the heart of the darkness. But in the darkest moments, when the weight of the world seems unbearable, there is still a flicker of hope. Sam, ever loyal, ever steadfast, continues to walk by Frodo's side. His courage is quiet, but it is no less powerful than any sword or shield. He reminds Frodo and the others that even in the deepest darkness, there is still light to be found, if only they are willing to search for it. It is Sam who brings a simple, yet profound, truth back into their hearts. That the journey is not about power, nor about the ring, but about the choices they make along the way. It is about the friendships that have sustained them, the moments of kindness that have kept them going, even when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. And so, as the final leg of their journey approaches, they are reminded that, despite the darkness, despite the overwhelming odds, there is still hope. There is still the possibility of redemption. For in the end, It is not the ring that will decide their fate, but their choices, their ability to resist the temptation of power, their willingness to stand together, to fight for what is right, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. They are not walking into Mordor to destroy the ring alone. They are walking to destroy it within themselves. The true battle lies not in the land, but in their hearts. Each of them must decide whether they will succumb to the ring's whispers, or whether they will stand firm in their resolve, in their friendship, and in the quiet but powerful truth that light can survive even in the deepest darkness. As they approach the fiery chasm of Mount Doom, where the ring was forged and where it must be unmade, the tension between them grows ever more intense. Each step takes them closer to their goal, but also to a reckoning with the very nature of power, of desire, of choice. It is not enough to destroy the ring. They must also destroy the temptation to use it, to wield its power, to believe that in doing so, they can control the world around them. The question that now looms before them is no longer just how they will destroy the ring, but whether they will have the strength to resist its call, to let go of the very thing that has driven them all this far. And as the fires of Mount Doom burn brightly ahead, they know that the final choice will be the hardest of all. For in the end, the destruction of the ring is not the end of the journey. It is only the beginning of a new one that will test their hearts, their wills, and their capacity for hope. The journey that began in the peaceful hills of the Shire has now brought them to the very heart of darkness, where every step feels heavier than the last. Mount Doom looms before them, its fiery peak a constant reminder of the task at hand. Yet it is not just the physical distance they must cover that weighs on their shoulders. It is the weight of the ring, still in Frodo's possession, still a constant companion, a burden he feels not just in his arms, but in the very core of his being. The fires of Mount Doom beckon them, but they are not drawn by the promise of destruction. They are drawn by the quiet necessity of what must be done. For it is not just the ring that must be cast into the fire, but the temptation to use it, to control it, to believe that in wielding its power, they can shape the future of Middle-earth. It is a final trial for each of them, a moment where their will must be stronger than the ring's pull, where their choices must define not just the fate of the world, but their very souls. The Fellowship has been tested time and again, but now, at the precipice of their goal, it is no longer a question of whether they can succeed in the physical task before them. It is a question of whether they can resist the lure of power that has haunted them since they first set foot on this path. Frodo, alone in his burden, feels the ring growing heavier with each passing step. The whispers have not ceased, and in this dark place, they are louder than ever, promising him control, promising him victory, promising him the world, all in exchange for his surrender. But Frodo knows that surrender would mean more than just losing himself. It would mean losing everything he has fought for, everything the Fellowship has fought for. His heart aches as he feels the ring's weight more deeply than ever before. But it is in this moment that he realizes the truth. It is not the ring that must be destroyed. It is the desire to control that it represents. It is the need to dominate, to bend the world to one's will, that must be cast aside. And in this realization, Frodo finds a strength he did not know he had. He does not have to fight the ring with strength alone. He must fight it with his will, with his refusal to let it define him, to let it shape his choices. Yet, even as Frodo reaches the final stretch of his journey, he is not alone in his struggle. Sam, his ever-loyal friend, has never wavered in his belief in Frodo, and in this moment, his quiet strength becomes the anchor that holds Frodo steady. Sam knows the weight Frodo carries, and though he too feels the pull of the ring, he understands that the true victory will not come through strength or power. It will come through choice. The choice to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep resisting. The choice to not be swept away by the whispers, but to hold firm to the love and loyalty that has bound them together from the very beginning. As they approach the fires of Mount Doom, the last of the Fellowship follows in their footsteps, each carrying their own doubts, their own fears, their own desires. But each of them knows, deep down, that the greatest threat is not Sauron's armies, not his minions, not his malice. The greatest threat is the temptation to wield the ring for their own ends. They know that if they give in, even for the noblest of reasons, they will become no different than the Dark Lord they seek to destroy. And so, they press on, with every ounce of strength, every last reserve of willpower, knowing that the end is near. They are no longer just walking toward Mount Doom. They are walking toward the end of their own struggles, toward the moment when the ring will either be destroyed or they will be consumed by it. They are walking toward the final choice, the one that will define the future of Middle-earth. Frodo reaches the edge of the fiery chasm, the ring heavy in his hands. The heat from the molten rock below rises up, making the air shimmer and pulse with intensity. He stands there for a moment, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him, the choice laid bare before him. The ring whispers again, urging him to take it, to use it, to control the world as Sauron would have. But in that moment, Frodo realizes that he has already made his choice. The ring does not hold him any longer. The struggle has been won, not by force, but by his refusal to let the power it represents define him. But before he can cast it into the fire, something unexpected happens. The ring, sensing the loss of its influence, exerts one final, overwhelming pull. In a desperate moment of weakness, Frodo is overcome. He looks into the depths of Mount Doom, and for the briefest of moments, the temptation is too much to bear. He sees himself, a king, a ruler, a master of all that is before him, the ring his to command. The whispers grow louder, and Frodo steps back from the edge, his fingers tightening around the ring. In this moment, it is Sam who steps forward, not with anger, but with the same unwavering loyalty that has carried him through this journey. He sees the conflict in Frodo's eyes, the same doubt, the same struggle he himself has faced. But Sam knows that this is not Frodo's fight alone. They are a team, bound together by something far stronger than the ring. Sam's hand rests on Frodo's shoulder, a simple gesture, but one that brings clarity. "Frodo," Sam says softly, "it's not about who rules, it's about who chooses. You've carried this far enough. Don't let it carry you." The words are simple, but they cut through the confusion, through the whispers of power, through the pull of the ring. Frodo looks up at Sam, and in that moment, he understands. He has not been alone in this journey. He has not carried the burden of the ring alone. Sam's loyalty, his belief in him, has been the anchor, the true strength that has carried him through. The ring may have tried to claim him, but it was the love and friendship of those around him that kept him grounded, kept him true. With one final, deliberate motion, Frodo raises the ring over the fire. The heat is unbearable, the ring trembling in his grasp, as if it knows its end is near, and then, with a quiet resolve, he lets it go, casting it into the fire, watching as the flames consume it, as the power of Sauron is finally undone. The world holds its breath for a moment, the land silent, as though even nature itself is waiting for the moment to pass. Then, slowly, the shadows begin to lift. The fire burns bright, the darkness that has plagued Middle-earth for so long finally beginning to recede. The burden is lifted, and with it, the weight of years, of wars, of struggles, is finally gone. The journey is complete. Middle-earth is free. As the smoke of Mount Doom rises into the air, the Fellowship stands together, no longer bound by the weight of the ring, but united by the bonds of friendship, loyalty, and love. They have chosen not power, but hope. And in this, they have saved not only themselves, but the world. The path ahead is unknown, but for the first time, it is a path they will walk together, without fear, without burden, and without the shadow of the ring. The future is theirs to shape. And so, they step into it, side by side, ready for whatever comes next. This is the end of the journey, and yet it is also the beginning. The beginning of a new world, free from the darkness of domination, free to rebuild and grow, where the choices of the past have shaped the hope of tomorrow.